You know that feeling, don't you? That little nagging sense that maybe life isn't quite as vibrant as it used to be. Maybe the colors seem a bit faded. The music doesn't land the same way. People feel harder to connect with. It's that classic things were better back in the day vibe. But what if it's not actually about the world getting worse? What if it's something else, something happening inside us? Today, we're doing a deep dive into some really fascinating stuff from reality transurfing. We're looking specifically at chapters on the induced transition and the alternatives flow. Our mission, really, is to unpack how our own internal state, our reactions day to day, might actually be shaping the reality we experience. And, maybe more importantly, how we can learn to navigate these unseen currents, to bring back some of that vibrancy and live more intentionally. We'll touch on big ideas like lifelines, these energetic pendulums that are always nudging us, the alternative space, and this art of going with the flow. So get ready, this might just shift how you see things. Okay, so let's dig into that feeling first. Life losing its color as we get older. Is that just nostalgia playing tricks on us? Or is there something more going on? We all remember being young, right? Everything felt so intense, so possible. But the world itself, it hasn't changed that drastically for most of us. So why the shift in perception?
Well, that's where this concept of lifelines really comes in handy.
Yeah.
The idea isn't that the world itself is deteriorating. It's more like you, the individual, shift onto a different lifeline. Think of it like parallel realities. And when you constantly express dissatisfaction, complain about things, you unintentionally turn yourself into lifelines where things genuinely are worse.
Wow. Okay. So we're kind of self-selecting into dimmer realities through our own negativity. That's quite a thought. Does that mean everyone is basically living in their own bubble reality, even if we're walking down the same street?
Precisely. Yeah. The alternative space, this big information field, it holds everything for everyone. So in one part of it, life feels gray and dull. In another, it's bright and exciting. You can see it play out, can't you? Same town, you got people thriving, people struggling. Same party, one person's having a blast, another's stuck in their head worrying. They're looking at the same objective stuff, but their experience, their perceived image, is totally different. Each person is tuned into their own little sector, their personal layer of the world.
Okay, but how do we end up on those dimmer lifelines? I mean, nobody actively wants that, right? It feels like we stumble into it.
Well, think about when you're very young. A child just accepts the world, mostly. They're curious, open, less critical, full of hope, really. But then life happens. Disappointments, failures, they accumulate. And gradually, you might find yourself with more reasons to complain than to feel hopeful. And that discontent, that maybe even just low-level whining, it becomes this driving force. You're radiating negative energy. That energy pushes you subtly onto lifelines that match it. So life becomes less satisfying, confirming your belief that it is. And this discontent acts like a what the text calls a triple force boomerang. It's pretty interesting.
Triple force. Okay, break that down.
Right. First, there's something called excess potential. When you're intensely dissatisfied, you create this energetic tension. And the universe, seeking balance, pushes back against you. Think of it like trying too hard creates resistance.
Yeah.
Second, that negativity feeds what are called pendulums. These are like collective thought forms or energy structures that thrive on strong emotion.
Okay.
And third, just by radiating that negative energy, you automatically shift your own vibration. You start resonating with lifelines where negative things are more likely to happen. What's really key here, though, is that unlike, say, an oyster that just reacts instinctively to irritation, humans have awareness. We can consciously choose how we relate to the world. Most of us just don't. We react.
We react, yeah, that hits home. And that leads right into how external forces like mass media seem to tap into this reaction habit. They seem almost designed to provoke fear, anger, those strong negative emotions we react to so intensely. Why is that?
Well, from this perspective, mass media outlets often function as powerful pendulums, and pendulums need energy to survive. Negative emotions like fear and anger are very potent forms of energy, so they focus on negative news, dramatize it, keep it front and center. Good news rarely gets that kind of treatment, does it? It's how the pendulum hooks people in, gets them emotionally invested, and then basically siphons off their energy.
So even just passively consuming news, if it evokes strong feelings in us, we're essentially getting drawn into that pendulum's frequency. We become participants just by reacting.
Exactly. That's the induced transition. When you get really worked up about a news story, thinking about it, talking about it, feeling strong emotions, you start radiating energy at that same frequency. And that radiation shifts you onto lifelines where similar events are more probable. You're drawn closer to the vortex, so to speak. And in some cases, you might even end up directly involved.
Okay, let's make this concrete. Can you give some examples of how this induced transition works in everyday scenarios, like disasters?
Sure. Catastrophes and disasters. Let's say there's a big earthquake or a flood reported. If you get deeply disturbed, obsess over the details, express a lot of fear or anxiety about it happening to you, your thought energy gets hooked by that disaster pendulum. You're tuning into its frequency. The suggested solution isn't to be callous, but to intentionally not absorb the negativity. Acknowledge it, perhaps, but don't dwell. Don't react emotionally. Let it pass by. Critically, trying hard to avoid thinking about it also doesn't work, because avoidance still focuses energy on the thing you're trying to avoid, creating that excess potential again. It's about neutral observation, letting it go.
Neutral observation, that's tricky. What about something huge like war? If you protest against war, are you inadvertently feeding the war pendulum? That seems really counterintuitive.
It does, doesn't it? But think about how wars often escalate. One side pushes, that's the pendulum's prod. The other pushes back with equal or greater force. Aggression meets aggression. The pendulum thrives on this conflict, this division. It primes people with discontent, blames the other side. So when you fight against war, protesting loudly, expressing intense anger and opposition, you're still operating on the frequency of conflict. You're engaging with the pendulum on its terms, giving it energy. The transurfing perspective suggests the way to actually undermine war is to refuse to play the pendulum's game. Ignore its provocations, don't feed the conflict frequency, and instead focus energy on building peace, supporting peaceful actions quietly.
Wow, okay. That requires a real shift in thinking. What about something more personal, like the fear of unemployment? How does that spiral work?
That often starts subtly, doesn't it? Maybe some rumors at work, news about the economy, whispers of layoffs. A little concern can easily morph into anxiety, then genuine fear. And that fear, you start radiating it. You're tuning into the unemployment frequency, the unemployment lifeline. Other people can often pick up on that fear, consciously or not. It might affect your performance, your interviews. Often there's an underlying feeling of guilt, too, like I'm not good enough, which amplifies it. The way to break that cycle is to take action. Even small actions like updating your resume or looking at job postings, creating a safety net, even a mental one, builds confidence and reduces that fear frequency. Balance is restored when you feel secure.
Action counteracts the fear frequency
Really?
and illness, especially during, say, an epidemic. You mentioned playing the epidemic game.
Yeah. Yes. According to this model, getting sick often starts with a kind of voluntary agreement to engage with the illness pendulum. You hear about symptoms, you start imagining them, worrying about them, checking for them constantly. You're shaping your thought energy to match the frequency of the illness. Your subconscious then looks for confirmation. If you genuinely don't buy into the fear, if you don't give the epidemic mental energy, it's far less likely to affect you. It's interesting to consider doctors in this context. They're exposed constantly, but often don't get sick. Why? Perhaps because they're playing a different role observer, healer, not participant in the fear frequency of the patient.
That's a radical way to look at health. Okay, what about poverty? Can hating being poor actually keep you poor?
It absolutely can. If you despise your poverty, if you're filled with envy for the wealthy, if you're constantly wishing things were different but feeling resentful, you're radiating the energy of lack, of poverty itself. You make it impossible to shift to a lifeline where prosperity exists because you're tuned into the opposite frequency. The more you hate something, poverty, your looks, the government, the more you tend to experience it because that's where your energy is focused. And remember, simple desire doesn't have much power here. It's intention, that calm readiness to have and to act, that actually shifts things. If deep down wealth feels uncomfortable or you resent others who have it, your subconscious might actively block it because you've devalued it energetically.
So it's not just about wanting it, but being energetically aligned with having it.
Exactly. And the flip side, losing wealth, often follows a similar induced transition pattern. It might start with a small financial setback. Simple disappointment isn't that powerful. But if that turns into anger, resentment, blaming others, now you're feeding a destructive pendulum. That negativity can snowball into fear and anxiety about losing everything, which attracts more financial problems. The key is not to grab onto the tail of the spiral. Don't let initial minor difficulties trigger that cascade of negative reaction. Acknowledge them, deal with them calmly, but don't feed them with strong negative emotion.
Okay, so the pattern is clear. Reacting negatively, getting emotionally hooked pulls us into these unwanted scenarios. The escape then sounds like emotional detachment. But how do you do that? It seems so simple, yet so hard.
The goal is to stay as far from the pendulum's vortex as you can, energetically.
Yep.
And yes, that means consciously choosing not to absorb negative information. Don't show interest in gossip or drama. Refrain from excessive worry or endless discussion about problems. Let negative news, negative energy just pass you by. And the key distinction again, not absorbing, means intentionally ignoring or remaining neutral. It doesn't mean actively fighting or striving to avoid it, because resistance, as we said, just feeds the frequency you're trying to escape. It's a gentle letting go, a refusal to engage.
Gentle letting go. Okay, so moving on from how we get pulled into things, let's talk about navigating reality more broadly. If our energy shapes our personal world, how does that fit into the bigger picture? Is there some kind of universal structure?
Yes, that's the alternative space. You can think of it as this infinite information field, almost like an energy matrix containing the blueprint for absolutely everything that could possibly happen or exist. When our own energy, our intention, resonates strongly with a particular part of that matrix, that potential pattern starts to manifest, to become physical reality for us. And what's really fascinating is how we access this field. It's not primarily through our logical mind, our reason. It's through our subconscious, what Transurfing often calls the heart or the soul. That deeper part of us can directly perceive information from the alternative space. This is where intuition comes from, those gut feelings, premonitions. It's also the source of genuine creative insights, inventions, art, music that seem to come out of nowhere. Our conscious mind then tries to translate these insights into words, symbols, logical structures, but often it's working with, as the text puts it, old bricks. It's interpreting new information through the lens of existing knowledge.
That's a really key point, the idea that our rational mind isn't the source of true originality, but more of a translator or assembler. It just rearranges what it already knows. So breakthrough ideas have to come from that deeper heart connection.
That's the idea. Think about major scientific discoveries or moments of artistic genius. They often describe an aha moment, a flash of insight that wasn't reached through step-by-step logic alone. It felt like it was received. The heart feels, it knows directly, without needing words or categories. It taps into that raw information field. The mind analyzes, labels, compares, it processes, but it doesn't originate in the same way.
So if the heart is our antenna to this field, how do we actually learn to hear it? How do we tune into that rustle of the morning stars, as the book calls it? Especially when our minds are so noisy, always chattering away with thoughts and worries. How do we tell intuition apart from just wishful thinking or anxiety?
The heart signals are usually quite clear, but subtle. They manifest as feelings of inner comfort or discomfort, a sense of rightness or wrongness about a situation or decision. Your soul, connected to the alternative space, has a sense of what lies ahead in different potential paths, different lifelines. It tries to give you a heads up. This path feels good, that one feels off. The mind, with its logic and fears, often shouts over this subtle feeling. The practice is learning to quiet the mental chatter, even for moments. If you can pause the relentless train of thought, just sit with emptiness for a bit, you might start to notice that inner voice. It's not usually words, it's a feeling. Reflection without thought, sound without volume. Practically pay attention to your inner state before making a choice. If you feel you have to talk yourself into saying yes, if you have to rationalize away a feeling of unease, that's usually your soul whispering no.
That's a great rule of thumb. If you have to convince yourself, it's probably a no. Okay, so we're listening to the heart. We're not fighting pendulums. How do we actively move forward? What does going with the flow look like if it's not just passive drifting?
It's about intentionally moving with the flow of alternatives. This flow arises naturally from the cause and effect chains within the information structure of the alternative space. These streams represent the paths of least resistance, the most energy-efficient ways to move towards a goal. You're not fighting the current, trying to swim upstream, but you're also not just letting it bash you against the rocks. You're actively, consciously navigating within the flow, making smooth adjustments, using the current's energy purposefully, like a skilled surfer riding a wave. And this is very different from some common, less effective approaches to life.
Right. The book contrasts it with a few archetypes, doesn't it?
Yes. There's the needy person. They've basically given up responsibility, always asking for help, blaming fate. They often feel guilty or helpless, which creates that problematic excess potential. Then there's the indignant. This person is always complaining, demanding their rights, feeling wronged by the world. This constant dissatisfaction, as we discussed, just invokes balancing forces against them and makes their own life harder. And finally, the fighter. Always taking a stand, battling against perceived injustices or opponents, getting caught up in competition and struggle. Their life becomes this constant, exhausting battle, draining their personal energy.
Okay, so if being needy, indignant, or a fighter are all draining and counterproductive, What does the transurfing path offer instead? How does one simply go ahead and get it without asking, demanding, or fighting? That still sounds a bit abstract.
It boils down to exercising your freedom of choice in a different way. You identify what you intend to have or achieve, align your energy with it, listening to your heart's comfort level, and then move calmly in that direction, following the path of least resistance as it unfolds. You trust that the flow itself contains the optimal solutions. The mind loves to create complicated plans and force things, but often if you just take the simple, obvious next step that feels right, the path unfolds much more easily. It's about yielding to simplicity, not wrestling with complexity.
Yielding to simplicity, I like that. But how do you know if you're actually on the flow? Or if you're about to hit, a metaphorical sandbank or waterfall? Does the universe give us little hints or warnings along the way?
Absolutely. Life is constantly sending guiding signs. Now, these are different from traditional omens. An omen only works if you believe in it. Guiding signs are more objective indicators of a potential shift in the flow, a possible turn onto a different lifeline. They often show up as that feeling again, that subtle sense that something's not quite right here, or maybe an unusual event happens, something out of the ordinary that catches your attention for no obvious reason, a weird coincidence maybe. And interestingly, sometimes guiding signs can come through things other people say completely casually, offhand remarks that just happen to land perfectly for your situation.
Casual remarks, how does that work?
The idea is that sometimes when someone's mind is relaxed or distracted, dozing, as the text puts it, their soul, which has that direct connection to the information field, might speak through them without them even realizing it. They say something that's precisely relevant to you.
That's wild. Okay, so if we notice these signs, the feeling, the weird event, the stray comment, how do we interpret them practically? It could be easy to overthink or misread them.
You can keep it simple. Try to interpret them as basically a yes or a no, a green light or a red light for the path you're currently on or considering. Is the flow supporting this direction, or is it suggesting a turn? But honestly, the most reliable sign, always, is that inner feeling of comfort or discomfort we talked about, your gut feeling. If thinking about a certain action or pursuing a specific desire brings up feelings of guilt, doubt, anxiety, apprehension, listen to that. If you can let go of that desire or choose a different path, it's often better, because those mind-driven desires, the ones that feel off in your heart, are frequently urges imposed by pendulums, not your true soul's intention.
So listening to the heart remains the ultimate compass. This all points towards a fundamental shift, doesn't it? Moving away from constant effort and control towards something else. What's the core principle for living in harmony with this flow?
It really comes down to the paradoxical power of letting go. Letting go of the mind's desperate need to control everything, to solve every problem rationally, to manage the entire process. The mind's biggest mistake, in this view, is trying to control the flow itself. It tries to force the river to go where it wants. Instead, it should focus on controlling its own movement within the flow, navigating gracefully. Trying to control the flow is what creates the resistance, the obstacles, the problems. And if we connect this back to the idea of importance, reducing how much significance, how much weight, both inner self-importance and outer importance attributed to events, allows the flow to become smoother, calmer. When you release that tight grip of control, you give the world, the flow, more freedom. And paradoxically, situations often resolve themselves much more easily, sometimes quite satisfactorily, without your intense, forceful involvement. It's about trusting the process.
So it's less about giving up and more about shifting focus. From trying to micromanage outcomes to simply observing the process and navigating within it.
Exactly. The key phrase is shift your center of gravity from control to observation. Don't be so quick to jump in, to object, to argue, to prove your point, to criticize, to fix everything immediately. Give situations a little space. Allow them a chance to unfold naturally. See what happens if you don't intervene forcefully right away. By being willing to release that tight control, you actually gain more genuine influence, more real control over your own experience, because you're working with the current, not fighting against it.
What a fascinating way to reframe our relationship with reality. This deep dive really highlights how much our internal state, our reactions, our focus, our willingness to let go actively shapes the world we experience. It definitely challenges a lot of default ways of thinking.
It really does. And the core message is empowering, isn't it? Everyone is truly creating the layer of the world they inhabit. If you consistently emanate negative energy, you're degrading the quality of your life layer.
Yeah.
The power to choose your destiny in this sense lies in managing your own energy, choosing how you engage with these invisible forces, these pendulums and flows.
It really comes back to conscious choice, doesn't it? Choosing not to absorb negativity, choosing to listen for that quieter voice of the heart, the rustle of the morning stars, and choosing to soften that grip, allowing things to unfold.
And when you move harmoniously with the flow, trust the
Mhm.
process, the world does tend to meet you halfway. Things click into place more easily.
So ultimately, the choice is yours. Keep getting pulled into the drama and struggle of the pendulums, or learn to flow purposefully and gracefully with the alternatives. Which leads to a final thought for you to consider. What's one piece of negative information, maybe something in the news or some gossip, or perhaps one specific desire that you know deep down causes you unease? What one thing will you consciously choose to just let pass you by today? Don't engage, don't feed it energy. And just notice, how might that simple act of letting go begin to change the colors in your world?